Hey guys, welcome back. So last time I finished up explaining how I go about targeting isolated laydowns. In this installment, I want to talk about full-size logjams. Now, there are an endless variety of logjam configurations, so I'm just going to be as general as I can be. This is a fairly typical example and will serve well for the diagrams. Regardless of all the variations, the main things that I look for are deep water access. There should ideally be a good hole connected to it, or it should at least connect to the channel in some way. The current should run through at least part of it and not all be directed around it. It should create some obvious current seams and eddies, and then obviously the older the better. My overall strategy for fishing log jams is pretty similar to fishing single laydowns, but there are some key differences. Same as before, my plan is to start by putting a bait out in front of the cover and try and draw any active fish out. Then I'll move in and probe right down into the log jam before finally finishing up by checking a spot on the back side. Because these log jams are larger, they have more complexity and there are more spots where a fish might hold position, so bait placement can be critical when fish are in a more neutral mood. Now, while getting into a good position to fish the front side of an isolated laydown is generally fairly straightforward, it can be a bit more challenging with a full-scale log jam. Sometimes you just don't have a clear line to the best looking spot on the front, or even if you do, you can't hit it staked out to the bank. The solution is to take advantage of any leading snags out in front of the jam and clip off to them. In this spot, I can't hit the leading edge of the log jam where I want to place my bait. It's a smaller river, so I can hit it staked out on the sandbar side, but then I'm casting across the current and it's just going to move my bait out of position. The best option here is to clip off to that stick up where I can make a short pitch to where I want to put my bait. You can see here that the rod and the holder on the left is keeping my bait exactly where I want it. Here again, I can't make a cast to the prime spot from the same side of the bank that the log jam is on, and the river is just too wide to even consider something from the opposite side. There was a single tree out in front though, and clipping off to it put me in great position to get my bait where I wanted it. Sometimes the actual jam itself will present you with an opportunity for good positioning. Here there was a nice single log that gave me a perfect spot to tie off to so I could fish the front side of this log jam. You probably noticed that I'm fishing the front side of these pile-ups a lot closer than I do with the isolated laydowns. Generally speaking, the water in front of these log jams tend to be more snaggy, so I don't like to target them from as far away as I would with a single laydown. You're already playing with fire trying to hook a big fish around all this cover, and putting too much line between you and them when there's a bunch of random debris around is really just asking for heartbreak. So don't be afraid to take a position nice and close if you can get it. You don't always have the luxury of being picky about the position you're going to take, but a good rule of thumb is to try and take the closest position that leaves the cleanest looking water between you and the bait. Okay, so where do I want to put my bait anyway? Well, there's often a spot on the front side of these jams where the current breaks and backwashes into an eddy. If there's any sort of spot like this, then I want to start off by putting my bait right in this current seam. As long as it's not too tight, my preferred strategy here is to set a rod with cut bait on the seam and another with live bait in the eddy. Putting the cut bait on the seam will disperse the scent around under the log jam and in the area, and a struggling bait fish will attract the most attention sitting in that slack water pool. Even if there's not an eddy just like this, there's usually some sort of current break, and that's always where I want to start. I'm not really in a big hurry with these prime areas. It seems like if I'm lucky enough to get out in front of an active fish, then I'll get bit in less than 10 minutes. So if after 10 or 15 minutes out in front like this, I reckon that any fish I'm after are in a neutral mood, and I'm going to have to move in and get a bait right down in front of him. I always just assume that the strike zone of a neutral fish that's holding position is going to be about the size of a standard bathtub. That means I'm going to have to move in and start fishing vertically. The approach on these log jams isn't really as precision as getting onto a root wad. There are a couple of extra key points to keep in mind though. Just like with the root wads, you want to back paddle and come in nice and slow. And again, you want to avoid leaning upstream when you make contact. Most importantly, with these structures, not only do you want to be sure that you're not going to end up getting pushed on top of any wood, but you also want to make absolutely certain that your kayak can't get under any wood. Getting wedged under some wood on the front side of a log jam can be a pretty bad scenario. You also want to be sure you can paddle back out of anything you get in. Sometimes there are spots where the current gets pinched and starts moving pretty good. You don't want to get into a spot where you're actually trapped by the current. Apart from that, the only really tricky part of getting next to these spots is that the backwashes and eddies can start to turn or rotate you as you get close. You might be coming in nice and slow with your landing spotted, and just as you think you're about to drift in and touch it, suddenly the bow or stern will start to spin one direction because of the current. You just adjust to these current irregularities as quietly as possible and get up to where you can get your hand out onto a piece of wood to pull yourself in tight and work from there. Oh, and watch for snakes. Snakes love log jams. They blend right in. They're hard to see. I've reached right out and put my hand on them more than once. And snakes don't bother me, but there's no avoiding the natural startled reaction that comes from putting your hand on one without knowing it. Once I'm against the pileup, I start probing down below. I'm engaging in two types of presentations here. First, I want to try and tempt a big predator with an easy meal. And then if that fails, I want to try and provoke a strike out of aggression or irritation. So I start off by just trying to feel my way around the bottom, looking for objects or little drops. If anything feels interesting, then I'll bump around just a little bit to get my bait noticed. Then I'll lift it up off the bottom or above the debris just a little, and I'll dead stick it for a couple of minutes. I'll repeat this a couple of times, then I'll finish with a couple of minutes of just persistent bumping and banging coupled with lifting and dropping. I crawl my way along the face of the jam, and I stop to do this every few feet. If I find a spot that just feels like it might be the best spot in the whole log jam, then I might stop this process and just soak my bait on it for maybe 10 minutes while I let the entire area settle. Otherwise, I just work my way out towards the open water. I always concentrate on the face, but I don't typically bother with the side towards the open water unless the logjam configuration really calls for it, like say if it parallels along the ledge to the channel. Once I've finished my sweep around the front, I'll peel off and paddle around to hit the backside. The backside is usually pretty straightforward. The best log jams will have another nice eddy on the back, and this spot should definitely not be overlooked. In theory, the alpha fish in the area will own the prime spot somewhere on the front side, but I've had some pretty good luck with these backside eddies too. You can usually just get close to the bank and the circular current will drift you right up towards the backside of the jam. I fish these backside eddies just like I fish the ones in front. I'll soak my bait on the current seam and then again in the heart of the eddy itself. And that's it really. If I'm only getting one pass at a log jam, I might paddle back up and repeat the entire process again before I move on downstream. If I'm just working a small section of river, then I might make a milk run of targets and I'll probe the log jam like this just each time I come to it. These big wood piles can often be the home to the biggest fish in the area, so I hope that walking through these has given you some tips or even just some confidence to get right in there and get after them. I'm going to leave myself room for one more in this series to cover any questions and hit a few extra points like maybe just scattered wood in general. So please post any comments or questions you have. Let me know if you like this format and be sure to subscribe for future posts. Until next time, thanks for watching.